much time to get ourselves warmed up doing visiting. Isn't it great though? But we're glad when everybody visits. This is a big part of what we do.
No, I'm not.
All right, so we are ready.
I'm good to go on my end.
She's a social worker. I'm a social worker. He's an
Elaine and Denise and Pat. Okay, I'm calling us to order again.
What part?
So Caleb, I'm ready to use you and Lauren. Bring our girl up. Yeah, we've been talking about Okay, thank you everybody for joining us for this session. We at Christian Counselors of Texas have wanted to offer very much timely topics that we all need to learn and bring in our Christian perspective into our professional lives. That's the main purpose of our organization. And we're very happy that the South Austin satellite is joining us. So welcome, South Austin. So today we have with us Caleb Matthews and Lauren Spalding. They work together in the office with at Nurture Family Counseling in Cedar Park. Caleb is both a licensed marriage and family therapist and a licensed professional counselor. And Lauren is a marriage and family therapist and soon to be a licensed professional counselor. She's an intern right now. They are speaking to us today about the LGBTQIA plus community. And they're both EMDR trained, and what I was really intrigued by is Lauren says she has a heart for clients with spiritual trauma. And I shudder to think if I ever contributed to that for someone. So I think our topic today is very timely in the world we live in, and if we want to love like Jesus, whoever comes through our doors. And this is a great area for us to learn from. So welcome, and we'll just let you take it from here.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, here, let's. Can we?
You're
Are we
good.
seen
You're
right now?
You're already here.
Okay. So as she was saying, I'm Caleb Matthews. I'm an LMFT and LPC here in the Cedar Park area. And I guess let's go to our next slide. We want to tell you a little bit about ourselves.
But first,
we're
going to be using this survey app. So if everyone could grab their phones, you can either use your browser and go to menti.com, or you can download their app. It's called Mentimeter. Yeah, we're encouraging it.
Yeah.
And once you get there to menti.com, you're going to enter our specific code for this presentation, which is 473519. And it's on here as well.
You don't need Wi-Fi. CRC has a guest Wi-Fi. You can find it on your Wi-Fi.
Yes. And once you enter our code, again, it's up at the top in case you missed it. This should pop up.
3519.
Sorry, can you say that again?
473519.
Was somebody saying CRC password for the internet? No.
A guest.
A guest Wi-Fi.
Is that
It is.
see one?
Yeah, they told me it wasn't working today. I don't know if it is. That's why I gave you the other one.
Yes.
Not trying to
So
be
yeah, you can either get the app or go to menti.com on a browser.
The app might work if you don't have Wi-Fi.
I'm just on it without Wi-Fi.
Yep.
So it looks like we've got 7 people on it so far. MENTI. So there's a mentimeter.com that has the login, but you have to go to menti.com and it'll just ask you to enter the code.
So it's not Mentimeter?
No, it's menti.com, and the first screen will say enter your code.
I'm texting you the Sorry.
Yeah, because I'm
This is what I'm saying.
You know,
Yeah, so now
Yeah, I
you'll
think this
enter
is gonna be a hard
enter this
task.
code.
Mackenzie,
So
or
that's 473519.
Katie, do you guys have a-
I think it's on the door to the waiting room.
Yeah,
I don't know, look real quick. I think it's Give Joy, but,
Something
the
out there.
cases.
I have that one. That's not the guest one.
I don't
Do you know the
it.
password?
I don't
Yeah,
even
it's
see that.
rejoice.
Yeah, it doesn't even say guess.
Yeah, capital R. Hold on, let me pull it up. It's kind of confusing.
We can write it on there too.
I'm not on the
website, so.
Oh, Give Joy exclamation mark.
Oh, that's a
is the
different
one
one.
for the guest.
But it doesn't
All
say
lowercase.
guest.
But it doesn't say guess, it's just CRC.
Yeah, the guest one's not working today. Only
So
the
then-
CRC
so
one
this
is
is the
working.
The other one.
One.
Yeah.
Okay, we have the other one. So we
And
can, here we go, Lauren's gonna give us one for the staff.
okay, there we go.
That's for the regular CRC
Yep.
one.
And this is a 0, not a letter.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me.
So I don't even see where we would be. Is that where we did this?
Actually, you see our slide?
Please
wait till
Yeah, that's what Tara I just shared with you.
That's right.
You just what?
Yeah, if you entered your answer already, it'll say wait for us to show the next one.
Okay, now I'm on.
Alright.
And this is just going to allow us to get some live feedback throughout the presentation, so that way we can hear from you, because we want this to be kind of a conversation with you guys. So
Yeah.
thank you for helping with our technology stuff.
Yeah.
So, is that, I've got it, 4735.
So it looks like we have about 16 people.
People down south are getting this.
I texted Vanessa.
Okay,
She said she got voting.
Okay.
So it should show this page and you would vote your answer. And it would say yes, no, or I'm not sure.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool.
And then once you enter your vote, then it'll just say wait for the presenter.
Alright.
Okay.
Is anybody having difficulty?
I think everyone's got it.
Okay. Great.
Alright, so we're gonna take a peek. 100% no one has used it. Alright, so we're gonna reference this app later on. We just wanted to do a test and give y'all a chance to get on it.
Yeah.
Alright, so we're gonna speak a little bit more about ourselves.
Yeah. So I just kind of wanted to start off with us telling you guys a little bit about us. So how we got started. I actually went to the Contemporary Relationships Conference in 2015, which is a conference that will actually be hosted here in Austin again this year. So if you're looking for a conference to attend for CEs, for therapists and social workers, LPCs, LMFTs, it's coming up, I think it's in May, and it's usually either in Austin or Houston. But I went to the one here in Austin in 2015, and I am a gay cis male who's Catholic, and so my pronouns are he, him, his. And so at this conference, I kept telling people about like which church I went to, and so they were like, you need to meet Jenna Minix, who started this organization called the Human Empathy Project. The Human Empathy Project is a nonprofit here in Austin that works to foster empathetic communication between the LGBT community and the Christian faith community. And we do that through confidential consultations and resources. So please feel free to use us as a resource. And kind of as you see our logo, it represents these two conversation bubbles that kind of overlap. So we've got the Christian community and then the LGBT community, and we exist in that in-between space where empathy is worked to foster. So that's kind of how we work. but I was at this conference, spoke with Jenna, and apparently now I'm the president of the organization. So that's what happens. And so I've been doing this for since 2015, so I guess about 5 years now, and have loved getting to work with this community and getting to work with pastors and family members and everybody who has questions about this topic. So happy to talk with anyone. We actually have cards up here for the Human Empathy Project for both Lauren and I, and other cards as well. So if you have any questions or want to get in contact with us, please do. But that's a little bit about me. Yeah, and I'm Catholic, so. Yeah, so I guess I want to talk just a little bit more before I hand it over to Lauren about kind of my personal journey with it, because being both gay and Catholic, I remember whenever I came out, I went to my church the next week at St. Mary's in College Station. College Station is slightly conservative, you guys, so just in case you didn't know. I went to my church and they were like, oh wow, so you're not going to come to church anymore? And I was like, why would I stop coming to church? Like, I have to, like, I'm a Eucharistic minister, like, I have to be here. And so I just like telling that part of my story because it means a lot to me to know that other people hear that story. I think that story is one of the most powerful things that we have. And so whenever I came out, in my mind, it was like, I can be both. But people really have a hard time and want to kind of separate this bubble from one another. And so that's been kind of one of my callings, is to help bring these this empathy conversation back into the picture and let people know, like, you can be both Christian and LGBT. Yeah.
I'm Lauren Spalding. I joined the board last year, coming back from maternity leave. Cal let me know that there were some spots opening, so I've been on the board since June as the treasurer. I am a heterosexual, cisgendered female. I kind of more identify as straight-ish. If you think of the Kinsey scale, I kind of fall more in the middle, but I acknowledge that I'm married to a straight guy and have a kid and do not have the same LGBT journey. And so I identify mostly as an ally. And I attended a different conference called Q Christian Fellowship. It used to be known as the Gay Christian Network. And Caleb attended it the year before, and I was like, how dare you not tell me about this? And so the next year I went with him, and I just really loved it. I highly, highly recommend the conference. You don't get any CEs from it, but you get so much life-giving energy. Everyone is so loving, so many different thoughts and opinions around this topic, but everyone's so respectful. There's a space for anyone. They do a really great job of creating community there. It's a great resource for people who are coming out, who haven't come out yet, for parents navigating this, loved ones, leaders, and so that kind of got me more drawn to this world.
What was that conference called?
The Q Christian Fellowship Conference. It's every year in January, and they always pick different areas to try and make it easier for people to travel. So they'll choose West Coast, then more Central, then East Coast. So we actually just got back from presenting at the last conference on empathy, and that was the week after New Year's in Florida. So it was nice to be at the beach.
And this next year it'll be in Albuquerque, so it'll be a little bit closer to us than Florida. So
yeah.
If you're wanting to go.
Yeah. So we want to have a little disclaimer before we go into our topics today, because we know that this is a divisive topic. We know that there's so many different opinions, especially for Christians, around this topic. So our intention today is to promote empathy and connection and knowledge. So this is a judgment-free zone. We're not going to chastise you if you use the wrong term or if you're not sure how to word things. You're doing great work just by being curious about this topic, and we really want to honor that. And we ask you to respect each other as you're navigating this as well. You'll find us using the terms LGBT, LGBTQIA or queer to represent this community. And we may even sometimes use the term gay, which used to be kind of a catch-all term. Now it's more queer is a catch-all term for the LGBTQIA plus community. So we'll be interchanging those terms.
Yeah, that's kind of a mouthful. I tend to default back to gay, which isn't as inclusive. So I want to try to start using the word queer, but I've also noticed and want to speak for pretty much anyone older, I would say, than 30 and up, really don't identify with the word queer. That was kind of used as a slang against the LGBT community in their youth, and so Smear the Queer, games like that promoted hate. Anyone pretty much, I would say, younger than 30 wants to use and actively uses the word queer as kind of the new catch-all term. So just some more information for you around that.
So that's important to be mindful. If you have clients that are in this population, don't just automatically assume. You can say, oh, so you're queer, and use that term. You want to ask them or learn by talking to them what phrases they're comfortable with, what words they use to label themselves, because they may have some trauma around certain words. We want this to be a conversation. We welcome feedback, interaction, questions. That's a reason why we use the Mentimeter is some people might be afraid to say what they're thinking, and we want to give a voice to everyone in the room. And so we'll be using that throughout the presentation. And today we're going to be going over some history of the LGBT population, some language and definitions, and then at the end we'll talk a little bit about advocacy and resources. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about perception. And we are curious what your perception is about this topic. When you think of LGBT and Christianity, what comes to mind? So I want you to go to Menti again.
Did one person vote no?
Mine's not changing.
It should change now that I clicked over to this slide that says, what is your perception? You can enter multiple responses, and they're just going to pop up here anonymously. They're not going to be connected to you at all.
Will you repeat the question, Lauren?
What is your perception when you think of LGBT and Christianity?
And it has a 25-word limit.
Please feel free to write some goals. So we've got confusion, hurt, complicated, disconnect, sin or not, challenging, wish there was more acceptance, against God's word,
Yeah, sorry.
judgment, divisive, divided theology, value systems, at odds, understanding. Looks like a lot of people have entered confusing.
Yeah, the more people enter something, the larger it will be on the screen.
Forgiveness, love first, disapproval due to scripture, I'm assuming. Pain, conflict, incompatible, family, hurtful, yeah.
That's a cool app, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So you can see from this word bubble, there's a lot of divide and confusion with this topic. Some words are kind of more towards the positive end of the spectrum, and some are more towards the negative. We have a lot of different ideas about it. Oxymoron. Yeah. Misinformed, argumentative. Yeah.
Oh wow, we have a lot more people using Menti now. 36 26. Dang.
South County.
So we're
I
hoping
can say something?
Yeah.
we're hoping today to help foster some empathy in your perception of this, whether you're coming in already in an empathic place or if you're coming in confused or conflicted about this topic. We're hoping to meet you where you're at and just give you some more knowledge. And our goal isn't to change your perception, but more just to allow some openness and curiosity. Right.
Okay, so one of the first things that we want to do, which I want to make sure that everybody can see, so I'm going to try to stand over here. Is this good for?
Do we need the whiteboard?
I don't think we
I
do.
think-
That way you can trade places with the
Okay.
whiteboard.
There we
Yeah.
go.
Okay. Thank
Because I
you.
think South Austin, Heather will tell you if he's out of the.
You're
Yeah, am I
good.
in the screen?
You're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we just kind of wanted to give you guys a little bit of a timeline of what this has looked like throughout history, because that gives a lot of context to how LGBT clients, LGBT Christians, kind of view this and what they're walking in with. So they're probably doing a little bit of research into this, but I want you to know that stuff too. So in 1200, you have St. Thomas Aquinas, who is one of the first people that you see like written down speaking about this. Fun fact, at this point in time, there wasn't really a term for homosexuality, and so pretty much anything that wasn't procreative sex was like any type of sodomy or anything like that. So anything that wasn't for procreation was listed as being unnatural. And so that's one of the origins of this, is St. Thomas Aquinas saying unnatural sex. And I think it's important to realize that homosexuality wasn't even a term at that point, because a lot of people think this has been condemned forever, and it's like, this hasn't even been a term for forever. So just knowing that, because there were lots of different words that were used for sex, which we'll talk a little bit more about near the end of our presentation whenever we start talking about scripture a little bit more. Then you have, there's not really a ton of information between 1200 and all the way up to 1800, 1900. At that point in time, homosexuality does start to gain kind of a name for itself, but it's not really coined until kind of the end of the 1800s. Whenever it starts to get listed as both a sin and a crime, so the church, not for it, also people in society, it was ranked up there right along next to murder, so people would get arrested, people would get killed for any type of homosexual act. Then in 1886, you have it going from being a sin and a crime, and this always sounds really weird to say, but we have a really progressive step in the community, because Kraft Ebing, in his book of case studies, Psychopathia Sexualis, started talking about homosexuality. He didn't use the word homosexuality, he used the term inversion or invert, and what that was that you're physically one gender, but you're internally the opposite gender, is what he thought it was, what that meant. We know that that's not really the way that it works, but his quote around it was a person that has a masculine soul with a female bosom. And so that might actually be a little bit closer to what we today coin as like transgender, but it was kind of all roped together back in 1886. But this was a progressive step, because it went from where it's a sin and a crime to no, these people aren't criminals, they're sick. They have something wrong with them. We don't need to treat them like they're bad people, we need to help them. And so that was actually a pretty progressive step at the time, to go from sin and crime to helping by saying, these people are sick, let's help them out. Okay, so moving on to next. So then in 1901, we've got Havelock Ellis, who's got a real unpopular opinion, because he said that people were born with it, and that it wasn't morally wrong. And for him to say this at that point in time was pretty revolutionary, to say the least. Freud actually also said that it can't be classified as an illness. Freud had some weird theories, you guys, about lots of stuff, not just this. But what he said is that everybody starts out as bisexual. Don't know how he got that. And then he said that based off of our experiences, the experiences that we have in our life, we turn either decide to go the heterosexual route or decide to go the homosexual route. And there was pretty much just a one or the other, according to Freud, which we'll see that kind of changes as time progresses as well. 1940, you've got Rado, who's a psychoanalyst, famous psychoanalyst, pretty much in psychology from 1900s to about 1940. That's about all there was psychoanalysis. So you've got Rado, who says that his explanation as an alternative to Freud's was that whenever heterosexuality becomes too threatening, it might be more comfortable for a person to be with someone of the same sex. And so it might be too anxiety-provoking to be with someone of the opposite sex, so staying with someone of the same sex would be more comfortable for them. So that was his explanation. Other psychoanalysts, similar to, I guess, Freud and these experiences, they said that it was a kind of messed up Oedipal complex. So your relationship with your parents has kind of skewed you towards homosexuality, which is something that shows up a lot in conversion therapy programs. They want you to talk about your relationship with your parents. That comes from this place, these psychoanalysts, is where they got that information. Then we've got 1948, Alfred Kinsey came along and created his Kinsey scale. So Kinsey, way ahead of his time. Lauren brought up the Kinsey scale a few minutes ago. So you've got 0 to 6. And what Kinsey said is, much like today's DSM, everything's on a spectrum. So we're going to put it all on this spectrum for people to learn about. And so 0 would be someone who is completely heterosexual, whereas 6 is going to be completely homosexual. And then that there's varying degrees in between. So I'm a 2 on the Kinsey scale would mean I'm mostly heterosexual, but sometimes homosexual. And so that helps give people kind of a spectrum. So Kinsey, way ahead of his time in 1948, there's a really good resource that we'll talk about more in other presentations, but I do like to give out. If you're working with the LGBT community today, there's a resource called the Genderbread Person. Highly recommend that. It puts things on a scale by today's standards. So Genderbread Person, highly recommend looking into that. In 1951, you've got Ford and Beach, who start to do some studies, so we're getting into research, which is fun. And Ford and Beach start looking into more just observing at this point, but they start looking into animals in the animal kingdom, and they start to see, like, actually, in the animal kingdom, homosexuality pops up here too. So previously we said this word unnatural for non-procreative sex. Now it's like, this is showing up in nature in other than human species, so is it really unnatural, was their question. They also sampled 76 different communities, and 64% of the communities were completely fine with, and it was socially acceptable to be homosexual. We tended to look at kind of the European and American cultures mostly, and so they made a goal to try to look at other communities. And like I said, 64% of the 76 societies said that it was socially acceptable. This is probably, I would say, one of the most important studies with Hooker in 1957. What she, and I want to emphasize the fact that she, because that's one of the reasons why this study did not get a lot of credibility, is because she is a woman. And that's really sad. But she did this really great study where she looked at homosexuals, and in all previous research to Hooker, everything before this in the timeline always looked at homosexuals that were already psychiatric patients. And so she did something different in that she said, I'm not going to look at psychiatric patients, I'm going to look at people that are functioning normally in society that are homosexual, which is still kind of hard to parse out because you have a lot of social society prejudice going on. But she found 30 homosexual clients that were functioning normally in society, 30 heterosexual clients functioning normally in society, and then she did 3 projective tests on them, the TAT, the Rorschach, and the Make a Picture Story, which were kind of like the standards at that time for projective tests. We still use those today. And what she did was she got those 30 or 60 tests, so 30 from homosexual, 30 from heterosexual, and then she mixed them all up. And she went to experts in the field who were saying, like, homosexuality, they're absolutely different. They're clearly different than heterosexuals, and gave them these tests and said, okay, here's 60 tests. Tell me which guys are homosexual. Tell me which guys are heterosexual. And the experts couldn't parse them out other than chance. Like, it was the same as if they were just guessing at random. So that was a good study to show that there's not really a huge difference between the two when it comes to that. 1969 is kind of whenever, has anybody heard of Stonewall? Hands? Okay, so Stonewall is kind of the beginning of the LGBT movement. There was a police raid that happened at the Stonewall Inn, which is in Greenwich Village in New York, and very famously, at this police raid was when a lot of LGBT people said, enough is enough, these police are here and invading our space for no good reason, and so they kind of fought back, and that's often cited as the beginning of kind of the LGBT movement. There was just the 50-year anniversary of Stonewall this past year, so there's lots of good like movies and books out there on Stonewall. Highly recommend looking into that as well. This was also whenever Dignity came about, which Dignity is the Catholic and LGBT organization that's been around for 50 years. So we finally have organizations that are popping up saying, like, you can be both. And then we've got the DSM. The DSM, until 1973, actually listed homosexuality as a disorder. And so it was just a part of this manual of mental disorders, which wasn't really lining up with the research, as you saw with Hooker. And so in 1973, that's whenever they actually removed it from the DSM. A lot of people think that at that point in time, everything was honky-dory with the DSM. Actually, in 1980, there was a lot of backlash whenever they removed it in 1973. Clinicians were saying, like, oh, we have to give people this diagnosis. I believe that this is the main thing that's going on with my client. And so in 1980, they actually added back in ego-dystonic homosexuality. Ultimately, it got taken out because it was perpetuating kind of anti-gay stigma. And whenever it gets taken out, as you've probably seen with every time that they come out with a new DSM, if it gets taken out of the DSM, those people are just instantly cured. So I guess no one has Asperger's anymore because it's no longer in the DSM. So people still might have difficulties because of being a part of a society that doesn't accept homosexuality, but what research started showing, which is why the APA took it out, is that homosexuality wasn't actually the cause of the distress. And then in 1986, they remove ego-dystonic homosexuality. There is still stuff in the DSM around sexual disorders not otherwise specified, so it can still be coded. but there's nothing specific to homosexuality anymore. So in 2013, so we're actually getting pretty recent, they removed gender identity disorder from the DSM, so this is more for the trans community. And then the DSM adds gender dysphoria, and so that's what's currently in the DSM. The reason this diagnosis still exists today, because a lot of people are like, ooh, we removed homosexual, shouldn't we remove trans from diagnosis as well? That might be something that's on our growing edge, but for now, the reason that it's listed as being in there is because in order for a person who is trans to get any sort of treatment, like a surgery, or in order to get medication, so that they can be in their correct gender, the gender dysphoria needs to be diagnosed so that way they can get those medications, so that they can go and get that from a doctor. And so that's why they say it's still in the DSM. I'm going through a lot of this right now, and I know that this is a ton of information, so thank you for bearing with me while I talk. It's literally hurting my voice, so I know I'm talking a lot. Also in 2013, Exodus International closes. Exodus International is or was a conversion therapy program. Conversion therapy, reparative therapy. We're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a minute too. But Exodus International was one of the largest ones. If you have seen the movie Boy Erased, Lucas Hedges, Nicole Kidman, really good movie. Very hard to watch though, because it's about a boy who goes to Exodus International and his experience. So if you want to know more about kind of what happened in conversion therapy, highly recommend that movie. It's based on a book that was written by somebody who was actually at Exodus International, so it does a good job of kind of giving you like a little bit of information. And then in 2015, that's when Obergefell versus Hodges happened, which was taken all the way to the Supreme Court and allows for marriage between in the LGBT community. So next, I'm talking a little bit about conversion therapy. This is a map of the United States, and it just goes through, and this is from 2018, so this is pretty recent. And this shows state laws protecting youth from receiving conversion therapy. So the ones that have green dots on them, like Hawaii and California, those are where state laws are enacted to prevent conversion therapy. State laws being introduced is going to be these dark green spots, and then all of the states with gray dots, which is the majority, do not have any state laws protecting youth from receiving conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is a divisive topic. And so I'm talking about a lot of them, so if you're activated, please let us know. We want to talk to you about this stuff, but today we're trying to give you a lot of information, so we want to get that out to you. But why I'm bringing up conversion therapy is because, as you just saw through that very quick timeline that I ran through, the counseling community and the Christian community for hundreds of years have been kind of persecuting the LGBT community, or saying that, like, oh, you're sinning, this is a crime, you're sick. And that's important to realize whenever people step into our offices, because we need to know that whenever I bring up something Christian, that they might have something in their gut that says, like, Christians told me I don't belong at Catholic Church anymore. Whenever I go to Christian church, they say that I can't be a Eucharistic minister anymore. Whenever I go to this person, that this might be their experience. And so just to try to promote understanding and knowing where they're coming from, because our communities haven't always been kind to them. And so making sure that we're doing that. The other thing that I wanted to bring up about conversion therapy is, this really resonated with me, is if a client were to walk into our office and say like, I'm not comfortable being white, I'm not comfortable being Mexican, I'm not comfortable being black, help me change. Any therapist worth his salt would probably say something along the lines of like, well, we aren't going to be able to change that about you, but we can work with you to kind of explore this part of your identity and get to know it and understand it a little bit better, and let's see how that fits and feels. And so knowing that piece, like just trying to make sure that we're not practicing conversion therapy, it is shown not only to not work. Whenever it gets researched, it not only does not work, it actually promotes harm. And so I wanted to go through a few statistics. So people who have undergone conversion therapy are 8 times more likely to commit suicide, 6 times more likely to have increased depression, 3 times more likely to utilize illegal drugs, and 3 times more likely to be at high risk for HIV or STIs. So whenever we try to tell them hide it or change, it's not working. And so how do we use this information to change how we practice?
Read those again?
Yeah, so 8 times more likely to commit suicide, 6 more likely for depression, increased depression, 3 more likely for illegal drug use, and 3 times more likely to be at a high risk for HIV or STIs.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are you going to discuss some of the components of conversion therapy?
We won't today. There's a lot of good information out there in that movie. There's also a really good podcast on conversion therapy that I highly recommend. If anybody listens to Stuff You Should Know, they recently did an episode on conversion therapy that was pretty good. I'm also happy to talk with you about it if you have more questions, but we didn't want to get too into that one today, more than this at least, but happy to talk with you in the future.
So we're going to go over a few definitions. So pull out your Mentimeter one more time. And I want you to answer this question: how do you define healthy religion?
And the code is 473519. 473519.
Communion with God, intimacy with God and others, love God, love one another, love God and love others, guiding towards eternal truth and salvation, acceptance, promotes well-being, following God's will, loving God with all of your heart, biblical foundation, based on the Bible, forgiveness, strong personal relationship with Jesus. A question of how are you defining religion, biblical foundation, love like Jesus, acceptance, the community that fosters humility and understanding and loves people well, biblical living, acceptance. Lots of really good answers. Living in the Spirit. So when we're defining healthy religion today, in terms of this topic, we're referencing Louis Causalino, who wrote Why Therapy Works. The way he defines healthy religion or healthy spirituality or healthy faith is dependent on whether a person's views are open or closed. And what we know is that when we have a closed idea around religious beliefs, we tend to lean more towards legalism, and we tend not to be living the great commandment, which is to love others. But when we're open, when we can acknowledge that we don't know everything, that God did not intend for us to know everything, and that we're supposed to be curious, always learning, always growing in our faith, we can fall into a place of more empathy when we're talking with people who have different beliefs than us or different ideas of what Scripture says. We also want to define the term gay or lesbian, and there's some misunderstanding around, does that mean, or is it defined by attraction, or is it defined by behavior? And what we have found is that it's leaned more towards attraction, which is something that we can't change. And it doesn't really matter if the person acts on this attraction or not in terms of how they identify. And this has been an ongoing debate, even within the LGBT community. Some people think bi just means you're confused and that you're eventually going to determine if you're gay or straight. But we know now that no, it is possible. It's more on a spectrum, like we were saying in the past, and that spectrum is a lot larger today in definitions and terms than it was in the past. So with that, there are three options. You can hide in order to show that you're good and honest. You can try to have a relationship, or you can commit to lifelong celibacy. And so those are the three things that someone who identifies in both communities, LGBT and Christian, are wrestling with. And that's a lot of what brings them to counseling. We also want to reference this term side A and side B. Has anyone heard of that before? Yeah, a few people. So this was created by Justin Lee, who is the founder of Pew Christian Fellowship, formerly Gay Christian Network. That organization started as an online platform for people who were looking for a safe space to practice their faith and explore their identity as LGBT. And when it was an online forum, it's now also a large conference and they have retreats and things like that. But when it was just an online forum, he noticed that the conversations were getting very combative because there were different ideas around what it means to be LGBT and what that means for your faith. And so he created these two terms, side A and side B. Side A means you believe that behaving on the LGBTQIA attraction is morally acceptable. So those people believe that sex is okay, marriage is okay if you identify in that community. Side B believes that to act on this attraction is morally unacceptable, but they still are open to someone being LGBT and Christian. So they believe that sex is a sin in that community, and some even believe that marriage is not acceptable. This is both people who don't identify as LGBT and people who do, who believe they are naturally experiencing this attraction, but they have been called to a life of celibacy. And he did not create this to divide the community. It in fact brought them closer together because now they had some language around their beliefs. They could easily, quickly say, I'm side B, well, I'm side A, and they could still have respectful conversations around this topic, and they could still find ways to support each other and have empathy for each other's beliefs. And the big reason he created this was because he believes we don't have to agree to coexist.
Yeah, and to add to what you're saying, one of the reasons why definitions is one of the things that we cover in here is because a lot of times, for example, in family therapy, you have people that are defining things differently, and so giving language to someone and letting them know, like, how are we defining gay in the therapy room today? Is that attraction or is that actions? Which one are we going with? And once you have that, that might be like, oh, the attraction is okay, whereas the action might be where the problem is. And so you need to make sure that you're talking about that, like, helps you kind of process the issue rather than just sit with the content. So moving to a process space. Whenever it comes to scripture, so scripture is often cited in the LGBT community. Has anybody heard this term before? The clobber verses. So that can be even triggering for Christians because the Bible used as a weapon, used as something to clobber someone, to hurt someone. The 6 verses that get utilized most are listed up here. And they're actually, they're being looked at again and again. Scripture is something that we're always looking towards. But whenever we're going back to the original languages, we're finding out that there's maybe some things kind of like what we talked about earlier where, oh, this was termed as unnatural. Were they talking about homosexuality, or were they possibly talking about any type of non-procreative sex? And so looking at these original languages, there's actually a link on our website, thehumanempathyproject.com. So if you do want to look at scripture through a different lens and kind of just see what theologians are saying today, we have that listed up on our website, just to kind of give other perspectives.
What's the website again?
thehumanempathyproject.com. And we've got, here, because you asked, you get a card. So there you go.
Thank you.
There's also a woman and man. She identifies as straight, he identifies as gay, and they're partnered together, and like they're both scholars, and they have basically committed their life to studying old Bibles, old texts, the process of rewriting Bibles. They've found all this information. She has really wonderful books about it, and she talks about it all the time. I think she actually has like a TEDx talk or something like that.
Yeah, she has a lot of stuff on YouTube. So Kathy Baldock, and she's listed in our works cited and resources at the end. So we'll pull that up here in a second and kind of tell you a little bit about them. Spot theory is the social pain, physical pain overlap theory. So luckily we live in a time where neuroscience is kind of up and coming, so that's pretty cool. So we get to look at things like fMRIs and learn a little bit more about the brain and what we're discovering. And the main gist of this, which just by the by, the Human Empathy Project has given a 2-hour presentation on just this one dot. So the social physical pain overlap theory. So what it says though, the gist is that the pain that lights up in our brain whenever we experience social rejection is actually the same pain centers that light up in our brain whenever we receive physical harm. So a blow to the stomach is perceived by the brain the same as whenever someone feels excluded. And I feel like that's an important, and we feel as the Human Empathy Project, an important thing to realize, once again, whenever that client walks in the door, what they might be experiencing neuroscientifically in their brain, in their body. Because anytime that we feel isolated or rejected at the same time, that's whenever stress can go on to become a trauma. And if you've been up on your research lately, you know that trauma is stored in the body. One of the best books out there for knowing more about trauma and trauma work, which I think is helpful for any therapist out there, is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. So highly recommend that book. Shout out to him. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit more about empathy, probably in the next couple slides. So I want to make sure we have enough time to get to everything. So we'll get to that. Okay. So these are what we've learned as the Human Empathy Project. So the real enemy of talking about the LGBT community and the Christian community, it can seem really divided. The real enemy here is ignorance, so ignoring facts and figures, trying to bring everything to the table and giving everyone a voice. That's why we do the Minty, that's why we do our presentations the way that we do them. Trying to hear from everyone is the solution, and that's what we've learned. The other thing that we learned is kind of the law of empathy that comes directly from Jenna Minix, and so I'm going to read a quote from her where she talks about empathy. First, if we think of empathy as a stream of water, then when the ground is even and level, ideally empathy will flow both ways. However, when the ground is uneven due to inequality or marginalization or judgment, then empathy must always flow downhill. Call it the law of empathy, if you will. So if empathy ever flows uphill, then we can say it's being extremely generous. That, I think, needs to be understood really well from the start. So what this law of empathy is saying is trying to give the LGBT community a little bit more of a voice, because all of those years of persecution is something that's kind of making this an unlevel playing field. So making sure that they're being heard, because it's going to be really hard for that person to talk. We also have this idea of preparation. So preparation is key. This goes into more depth in Justin Lee's other book, Talking Across the Divide, which will be on the next slide. And he talks about how we need to prepare ourselves, our audience, so whoever we're speaking to, whether that's clients or other family members, and then our environment for preparing them to make sure that they know what's going to happen in this conversation, that they know that this conversation is going to happen at all. So making sure that you do a little bit of preparation in each of those categories is going to help create and foster dialogue. Because the ultimate thing that we've found, the most powerful thing that we can use, is the power of story. And being able to share one's experience, that's what promotes change. Change shouldn't be necessarily the goal. We're not trying to move somebody across this diversity acceptance continuum. We all lie on this continuum, whether we're LGBT and thinking these things about the church, or if we're a Christian who is thinking these things about the LGBT community. We all lie somewhere along this diversity acceptance continuum, which for people that can't see, it goes hatred, dislike, discomfort, tolerance, acceptance, affirmation, and advocacy. This is a resource from Anthony Van Brown, who presented at the Gay Christian Network Conference. And so one of the things that I think is helpful for us as counselors, whenever we're sitting in a room with these clients, is to know that the goal shouldn't necessarily be like, whenever people walk in, they might be at hatred, but my goal is to get them all the way to advocacy. That is not the goal. That's a way too daunting thing. So maybe getting them to move from hatred to dislike, or from dislike to discomfort. And just notice and understand where they're at on this continuum is our goal. So not necessarily even trying to push in one way or the other, but just providing a safe space. One of the best metaphors that I've heard for this is the idea of an estuary. I didn't know what an estuary was whenever the guy talked about it, so I'm going to explain this to you guys a little bit. But an estuary is a spot where the river, freshwater river or space, meets the ocean, saltwater. So an estuary is the space between where the water has enough salinity that freshwater fish can survive, or that ocean water fish can survive, but it also has enough not salinity? Freshwater to promote freshwater fish in that area. So both types can survive. And after a person has lived after a fish has lived in an estuary long enough, at that point they can decide which direction they want to go to. Because if you put a freshwater fish in the ocean, they will die. But if you're able to hold space, sit with empathy, live in this estuary long enough, at that point it then becomes a decision to, do I go to become ocean fish, or do I go back and stay freshwater fish? And that's a choice at that point.
And that choice is around your thoughts and ideas of this, not choice of sexual orientation.
Yes, correct. Thank you. Next, I think.
We actually have a presentation around preparing for these conversations and noticing what comes up for you in these conversations. And we are looking to make it a half-day training, so we'll keep y'all posted about that.
I wanted, maybe just check, maybe have like a 5-minute wrap-up.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
because we want to be conscious of
Yes.
clients and wait on.
We do have an upcoming CE event. It will cover some ethics CEs for you. It is tentatively scheduled for February 22nd from 10 to noon at Soma Vita, which is in East Austin. And we'll be sure to email you, Michelle, when we have a firm date and time. We're just confirming with the venue. And that's going to be more in depth on this topic and a lot more in depth on the timeline, the idea of empathy, and things like that.
And it'll give y'all more of a space at that time to kind of talk back, which we know
Yeah.
we didn't get to hear
It's a bit
as
more
much from you.
interactive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, any questions or responses?
I always like that it says, whenever I give presentations, I always say question and response as opposed to question and answer. Might not have an answer, but I will have a response.
So I have a question. I really appreciate the enlightenment. Coming in and learning a lot, and I'll learn more. Where I come from right now is that this is against the Bible. That's where I'm coming from. So it's really more of an ethical question as an LPC. If somebody comes to me and says, hey, I want to work on my same-sex marriage, me as an LPC, currently it's against my value system. So I'm just curious, what approach should I do at that point?
Yeah, ethically, according to our codes, which we'll get it more into at the CEU event, ethically it would be up to the LPC, that's the LPC's growing edge, that's according to our ethics codes.
The
So-
for
Texas
LPC.
ethics or?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So up to the LPC to kind of decide, do I feel comfortable enough to help the client, or would I not be able to help them? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah,
Kinda
like,
put
am
to-
I able to put my personal beliefs aside enough?
Got it. Yeah.
And that goes for anything, like
Yeah.
Christian or not. We have different ideas and beliefs from our clients when they walk in around different topics. So
Yeah.
we're always wondering, can I put it aside enough to just sit and hold space for them?
Right. Yep.
Yeah, to that extent, Lauren, I can think of like, theoretically, do you believe cognitive therapy is sufficient for change, like from your theoretical orientation? You know, you might, if someone only wanted cognitive therapy and that didn't orient to your position, then you might have to refer out even, right?
Maybe just training.
Yeah.
You know, just training. There's so much training out there for so many things. And as new situations walk in your office, am I trained enough at this point? Am I willing to get that training? Do I need to refer out now?
Well, and that's what our ethics would say, is that that's on us to go get the training and make sure that you're getting that training, so that way you understand it a little bit more.
Yep.
I think
Makes
that's
sense.
the confusing part,
Yeah.
is at what point are we obligated to see that client and pursue the training versus first before we refer, as opposed to
Yeah.
referring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, referring at the beginning before you see the client, I think would probably be best practice, but
I'd say-
trying to still get that ethics, especially around this topic, since it's it's not the same, I think, as like, I don't know CBT, so or like a borderline personality client comes in and you aren't trained in DBT, which is like the best practice for them, that would be a referral out, whereas this would be more of a ethical growing edge.
Yeah. I think too, asking them what their purpose for counseling is. I've worked with a few people who are like, I just want you to know I'm gay, I'm not out, that is not why I'm here. I want to work on my anxiety at work. And so before I was knowledgeable on this topic, I was like, okay, I can see you and I can put aside, I'm not going to judge where you're at in your faith or anything, because you don't even want that to be in the room. So you might want to ask too, some people don't want that to be part of their counseling. They don't want to do the identity exploration with you.
I want to honor the time because I know we all
Yeah.
have afternoon schedules, but I want to thank Kayla and Lauren
Thank you.
for being here with us.
Oh, thank you.
And obviously, there's a ton more we could do. Can you all hang around a little bit? If people want?
Yeah, we'll be here for a few minutes. Please feel free to come grab a card
Yes.
if you want to
Thank
talk
you.
to us even after today.
And even though it took a little time to get the interactive piece put together, I thought that was so fun. So
Yeah.
I'm glad it
thank
worked.
you.
I'm glad it worked. Thank you. So we need to have the evaluation from you, please, and the sign out on the sign out sheet to document you being here, and then you can get your CP. And thank you guys. You can hang around a little bit. We'll see what others ask.
And I will take your